Hey guys, I'm Aubrey Nicole, an intuitive tarot card reader exploring mysticism, individual destiny, and transpersonal experience. This show is a mix of solo musings and guest interviews, covering topics related to spirituality, art, relationships, and personal development. Welcome to the Infinite Drop. In 1955, I went to Barcelona, and I met both my master and my destiny. These are the words of legendary French artist Niki de Saint Phalle. She's recounting her first time visiting Antoni Gaudí's Parkway. She says, "I trembled all over. I knew that I was meant one day to build my own garden of joy, a little corner of paradise, a meeting place between man and nature. 24 years later, I would embark on the biggest adventure of my life, the tarot garden." This feeling she's describing, being enamored, that's the only way to really describe how I felt one afternoon in the summer of 2021, when I unexpectedly discovered a museum exhibit featuring the work of Niki at the Museum of Modern Art PS1 in Queens, New York. The show was her first US-based exhibit and featured more than 200 of her artworks. I was enamored because within moments of stepping into the large gallery space, it became obvious that many of her pieces were based on the tarot deck. And it was the first time I'd seen the tarot represented in such a dignified and artistic light. During this museum trip, I also learned that Niki had dedicated a large portion of her life to the construction and development of a large-scale tarot sculpture garden in Italy. In today's episode, we consider Niki's work, as well as 5 other incredible artists who seem to have been born with a predestined, monomaniacal focus that allowed them to follow through on a Magnum Opus. Great artists who commit to and dedicate their lives to large-scale works of art have always had a special place in my fascination. James Turrell, Alex Jordan, and Antoni Gaudí, to name a few. The follow-through and single-mindedness required to deliver a masterwork that spans decades feels supernatural. Supernatural in the same way that the concept of fate and large-scale destiny is depicted in the Tarot's number 10 major Arcana card, the Wheel of Fortune. And this is what today's show is all about. So, where do these people find the will? Or is it innately inside them, like the oak tree blueprint inside an acorn? In The Soul's Code, In Search of Character and Calling, author James Hillman contemplates the existence of our individual acorns or daemons. Consider Heraclitus, I'm probably butchering that, Heraclitus's claim, ethos anthropoi daemon. Translation, character is fate, or deus absconditus, a Latin term that translates to hidden God. And of course, I consider this question from the perspective of the number 10 card in the Major Arcana, the Wheel of Fortune. This tarot card indicates a sense of us not having control over certain elements of our lives when the mysterious hand of fate enters the chat. This card, being labeled with the number 10, also advises us that we're at the end of a cycle and we're not yet poised in a position to know what will come next. It's a powerful and complex card layered in meaning and really seen as a turning point in our lives, a fate point. In the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck, you'll see a wheel central on the card, and it's representative of the cyclical nature of life and the changes and fluctuations that are inherent to the human experience. It's a card that reminds us that life is constantly in motion. Sometimes we're up, and sometimes we're down. Other themes with the Wheel of Fortune include karma, fate, opportunity, personal vision, and destiny. It can signify recognizing your role in the cycle of your life, understanding your own personal vision, and acknowledging your destiny. Of her tarot garden, Niki says, "The garden became much bigger than I had originally intended. There was no deadline, and I worked in complete freedom. To finance the garden, I made a perfume and other merchandise. As soon as I started, I realized it would be a perilous journey, fraught with great difficulties. I was struck by rheumatoid arthritis and could barely walk or use my hands. Yet I went on. Nothing could stop me. I was bewitched. When I hear her speak like this, I start to lean towards believing that perhaps some of us are born with a code tattooed innately inside our DNA, like the oak tree blueprint inside an acorn. A unique, predestined calling in this life, a driving force that urges us to do things. Where else would artists like Niki, Gaudí, and James Turrell find the will for these insanely large-scale projects? Then another part of me chimes in to say that it's more likely that we simply choose the things we will be fiercely committed to, simply by way of our habits, actions, and free will directed dedication to achieving a certain outcome. Perhaps it's some kind of complex combination of both of these concepts. In any case, I want to get into more of the details with Niki's tarot garden in Italy before wrapping up with brief introductions into 5 other artists' magnum opuses. Niki de Saint Phalle, and I just refer to her as Niki in this episode because I don't want to keep butchering the French pronunciation, but Niki was a French-American sculptor and multi-talented artist, renowned for her idiosyncratic and colorful artwork. The Tarot Garden, or Il Giardino dei Tarocchi, is a sculpture garden in Tuscany, Italy, based on the 22 cards found in the major arcana. And this garden is her lifetime's most significant masterwork. She was born in 1930 and started working on the project in the late 70s, so in her late 40s, and she continued for nearly 2 decades. The garden was finally opened to the public in 1998, and she passed away in 2002, just 4 years after its completion. Niki had a lifelong interest in tarot and found a deep personal connection with the imagery and archetypes found in its symbolism. The Tarot Garden features 22 monumental figures and structures and represents, like I said, the major arcana of the tarot deck. These sculptures integrate art with nature and spirituality, and they're made of steel and concrete and covered with mirrors and ceramics and colorful glass. You can totally see her inspiration if you've ever visited Antoni Gaudí's Parc Güell in Barcelona. She viewed this tarot garden as both a personal journey and a broader symbolic work. She saw the figures in the garden as representations of different aspects of her own psyche and human experiences. The sculptures, with their bold and unapologetic femininity, can be seen as a celebration of female empowerment. One of the most notable sculptures in the garden is the Empress Pavilion, which she used as a residence while working on the project. The sculpture is shaped like a sphinx and is an embodiment of the Empress Tarot card, number 3, labeled number 3 in the major arcana. The project was supported and collaborated on by various artists and experts, including her husband, who created the mechanical elements of some sculptures. Niki's Tarot Garden stands as a testament to her unique artistic vision, blending the mystical and the material, and remains a fascinating destination for art lovers and anyone interested in the tarot. I'm envious of Niki's monomaniacal focus, a quality that would absolutely be prerequisite for any artist to be able to follow through on the commitment to a magnum opus like this one. So this has me thinking, what other qualities would be required for an artist who can pull off a feat like this in their lifetime? And I can think of 3 things. You'd obviously have to have a deep commitment to your vision. Niki and the other 5 artists I'll reference here in a bit, they're all deeply committed to their personal artistic visions, and they often dedicate major portions, if not their entire lives, to the realization of their projects. This unwavering dedication usually comes at great personal and financial costs. The second thing, you have to have perseverance against all obstacles. Many of these artists face significant obstacles, whether it's financial, critical, or logistical. One of the artists I'll talk about, Rodia, spent decades building his Watts towers with found materials, often facing a ton of skepticism, not to mention legal challenges. And the third thing you'd have to have, a spirit of experimentation. A willingness to just experiment is central to all their work. This experimentation isn't limited to artistic techniques. It extends to their use of materials, scale, and the integration of their work with its environment. In fact, Niki has said, I felt it was my destiny to make this garden, no matter how great the difficulties. Total immersion was the only way to realize this garden. I imposed my vision because I could not do otherwise. It was made with difficulties, love, wild enthusiasm, obsession, and most of all, faith. Nothing could have stopped me. As in all fairy tales before finding the treasure, I met on my path dragons, sorcerers, magicians, and the angel of temperance. Hearing that type of language from her certainly bends me towards the predestined fate argument. And the romantic in me really kind of wants that to be the answer. So maybe I'll just allow myself to go there for now. Play in that reality for a bit while I contemplate my own level of desire in committing to a life's work. I'd like to leave you with a few other artists that come to mind when we consider the concept of monomaniacal focus and long time frame, large-scale masterworks. Immediately, I jump to one of my all-time personal favorites, House on the Rock. It's a place in Wisconsin, and the mastermind artist behind it is Alex Jordan. I visited this place completely blind, totally blind, no Google searches, zero research. I literally traveled hundreds of miles out of my way on a road trip based on this date's one-off suggestion that I would, quote, love the place. I bought a ticket at the box office, and although we only went out a couple times, this guy was dead right. I wound up having one of the more magical days of my life. No exaggeration. House on the Rock opened in 1959, and it's set on Alex's personal property in Wisconsin. It's a complex of architecturally distinct structures, rooms, streets, gardens, and shops that is still to this day a work in progress. He started on it back in 1945 and had a goal to build this man-made retreat. And he wanted it to be just as awe-inspiring as the view from the rock, which the house was eventually built on. So from that spark of imagination, the House on the Rock has evolved to include displays and collections of the exotic, the unusual, and the amazing. If you have not been to this place, do not Google it, just go there. Go there, buy the ticket, take the ride. It is insanely amazing. And then, of course, another one of my just absolute idols, the king of light himself, James Turrell, and his Roden crater out in Arizona. I had the chance to view the large-scale model for his vision of Roden crater back in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art many years ago, and I've eagerly awaited its completion ever since. Roden crater is located out in the Painted Desert region of northern Arizona. It's an unprecedented large-scale artwork created with a volcanic cinder cone by Turrell. And he's known, if you're not familiar with him, he's known as a light and space artist. James has always held, a top spot for me as one of my all-time favorite artists. When you're in a room with his light, or in one of the spaces that he creates, there's a cool little spot. I think it's called Night Sky. I believe it's spelled night, like Knight, and it's in Scottsdale. If you're out there, he had an incredible exhibit at Los Angeles County Museum of Art. But when you're in the spaces with his art, your mood completely changes. He is just an absolute master of using light and space to really create emotions and experience. So his Roden crater, anyway, represents the culmination of his lifelong research in the field of human, visual, and psychological perception. And it's a controlled environment where people will be able to experience and contemplate light. And this comes from James's official website for Roden crater. They say, specifically engineered spaces where the cycles of geological and celestial time can be directly experienced. This is what you'll find at Roden crater. Since acquiring the dormant cinder cone in 1977, Turrell has fashioned Roden crater into a site containing tunnels and apertures that open onto pristine skies, capturing light directly from the sun in daylight hours and the planets and stars at night. The site goes on to say, indeed, it is more akin to the communally developed sites of ancient Incas than to the conceptions of any individual one can think of in modern times. The first major phase of construction included the movement of over 1.3 million cubic yards of earth to shape the crater bowl. Construction is still ongoing, but when it's complete, the project will contain 24 different viewing spaces and 6 tunnels. I cannot wait for that one to open. Next, we'll talk about Antoni Gaudí, who I've talked about earlier in this episode. He's preternaturally prolific. Of course, La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. It's what he's best known for. He was an architect, and this cathedral is absolutely his masterpiece. I had the opportunity to tour it. It's still under construction. I toured it back in 2002 or 2003. I was absolutely captivated. He spent over 40 years of his life working on this project until his death in 1926. His dedication to the Sagrada Familia was so profound that, it literally consumed the latter part of his career. And this basilica is still under construction today, 100 years plus in the making. So he didn't get to live to see the completion of his Magnum Opus, but spent 40 years working on it. So he definitely gets to be included in this list. The next artist I'm only vaguely familiar with, and I really don't have a good reason for why that is, because his big masterpiece is in Los Angeles, where I lived for a very long time. So Simon Rodia, he is the artist behind Watts Tower in LA. He spent over 30 years constructing the Watts Towers. And Watts Towers is a set of 17 interconnected sculptural towers. There's different architectural structures and individual sculptural features and mosaics, all created single-handedly by him from 1921 to 1954. Again, that monomaniacal focus. I just cannot believe that a person without some type of predestined fate would be able to pull this off. But who knows? Maybe I'm just not as disciplined as some people. And finally, this is this last artist, Henry Darger. He's a man of mystery and someone whose work I can't wait to dive into more. I was unfamiliar with him until doing research for this episode. So Henry Darger is the author and artist behind something called In the Realms of the Unreal. He is a genius, a total outsider artist. He's known for his 15,145-page single-spaced fantasy manuscript called In the Realms of the Unreal. His extensive work was created over 6 decades. Let me repeat that. 6 decades. This manuscript and all of his art was only discovered after his death. So this 15,145-page single-spaced basically book also included several hundred illustrations, and they're like scroll-like watercolor paintings, and he also traced images cut from magazines and catalogs. And he arranged them in these large panoramic landscapes and painted in watercolors, and some of them are as large as 30 feet wide and painted on both sides. What's even harder to comprehend is that Darger was an obscure hospital janitor who lived a reclusive lifestyle, which I guess it's not that hard to comprehend. I mean, how would you have time to do all of this unless you were totally reclusive and just went to work and then had your side gig, your side passion project, I guess. So I'm going to be looking more into Henry Darger and this insanely amazing fantasy manuscript and work. But as we wrap up this episode of The Infinite Drop, I'd love to invite you to share your own thoughts on what was discussed here. On Spotify, I've set it up so that you can submit voice messages into me, and I'll have a chance to respond to them on future episodes. So, I'm really interested to know your thoughts. You can tag me also on Instagram and like an Instagram story and link to this podcast. I'll be super grateful, and of course I will reply. So here's the question for everyone. to be considering. Do you believe in the wheel of fortune and the idea of fate? Do we have this unique predestined calling and karma to fulfill in our life? Do we have driving forces that urge us towards our major plot points or plot lines in life? Or do you believe it's more likely that we simply choose what we'll be fiercely committed to by way of the habits, actions, and free will directed dedication we apply to a certain outcome? Tag me at Moksha Destiny on Instagram with a screenshot or link to the podcast. Let me know what you think. I'd love to engage. And like I said, I'm super grateful for your support and spreading the word about the Infinite Drop. Tap subscribe, leave a review. I'd appreciate it. Thanks for joining me here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay immersed in the Infinite Drop.